Sometimes those you've sacrificed everything for are the ones who value you the least. This bitter truth echoed through my mind as I sat alone at the empty table meant for 6 at Bellissimo's, the fanciest restaurant in Millfield. A delicate cake adorned with 70 unlit candles slowly collapsed in the June heat, the carefully piped frosting beginning to slide down its sides like tears. My phone lay silent before me. No apologetic messages, no missed calls, just the harsh glare of a social media notification that had revealed where my children truly were that evening. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My son Aaron and daughters Rebecca and Katherine weren't caught in traffic or dealing with sudden work emergencies as I'd initially believed. They were across town at the Riverside Mansion, dressed in their finest attire, raising champagne flutes alongside Veronica, the woman my late husband Charles had abandoned me for after 35 years of marriage. The matching grins on their faces told a story that stabbed deeper than any knife could reach. I'd dedicated my entire life to those 3 children, worked multiple jobs when Charles's business struggled, postponed dreams, sacrificed sleep, health, and personal ambitions to ensure they had everything they needed. Yet on the day I reached 7 decades of life on this earth, they chose her over me. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's video will reveal exactly how I turned this heartbreaking moment into the wake-up call my children never expected. I didn't allow myself to cry, not there in public where the waitstaff already regarded me with uncomfortable pity. I simply paid the bill, politely declined the server's awkward offer to package the untouched food, and drove myself home to the modest colonial house I'd purchased after the divorce. What happened in the weeks that followed changed everything, not just for me, but for my children and the future they had taken for granted. What they didn't realize as they clinked glasses with their stepmother was that I had just finalized my estate planning the previous week. Their absence that night wasn't merely a missed dinner. It was the moment that altered their inheritance. Forever. My name is Harriet Sullivan, though everyone in Millfield has always called me Hattie. For the past 42 years, I've been the steady hand guiding our family's small but successful chain of bookstores, Sullivan Literary, throughout the Northeast. I built the business from a single struggling shop while raising 3 children and supporting Charles through his numerous failed entrepreneurial ventures. When Charles left me for Veronica, his marketing consultant 15 years my junior, just after our 35th anniversary, he took half of everything we'd built together. But what he couldn't take was my business acumen, my loyal customer base, or my determination. While he and Veronica lived lavishly in the grand house that had once been our family home, I quietly rebuilt. I invested wisely, expanded the business cautiously but strategically, and created a publishing imprint that specialized in local history and poetry. By the time I approached 70, I had not only recovered financially but had accumulated considerable wealth, far more than my children suspected. Aaron followed his father into business, though with considerably more success, building a regional construction company. Rebecca became a corporate attorney, and Katherine pursued academia as a history professor. They all married, had children of their own, and built lives that appeared picture-perfect from the outside. What no one knew, not even my children, was how carefully I'd structured my finances over the years. The college funds for my 7 grandchildren were ironclad trusts. The bookstore chain was worth millions now, with the real estate alone representing significant value in growing urban centers. My investment portfolio had flourished under the guidance of a shrewd financial advisor who recognized my willingness to take calculated risks. All of it, every penny, had been meticulously organized in my estate plan to benefit my children and grandchildren equally upon my passing. I had even been making substantial monthly deposits into accounts for each of their households, helping with everything from mortgage payments to family vacations, assistance they'd grown to expect without acknowledgement. creating and narrating. This story took considerable effort, so if you're finding it valuable, please subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us. Now let's return to that devastating evening. I'd made reservations at Bellissimo's weeks in advance, securing their coveted garden terrace with its hanging wisteria and twinkling lights. I'd purchased a new emerald green dress that complemented my silver hair, had a professional stylist create an elegant updo, and even splurged on new pearl earrings. Small indulgences I rarely permitted myself. "We wouldn't miss it for anything, Mom," Erin had promised during our Sunday call the previous weekend. "I've already arranged for a babysitter and cleared my calendar," Rebecca had assured me. "I've submitted grades early specifically to be free." That evening, Katherine had said. When I arrived at the restaurant, the maitre d' escorted me to the beautifully decorated table with a genuine smile. "Your family should be arriving shortly, Mrs. Sullivan. Would you care for a glass of champagne?" "While you wait?" I nodded, settling in with anticipation. At 7:20, 20 minutes past our arranged time, I sent a group text. "I've arrived at Bellissimo's. Looking forward to seeing you all soon." By 7:45, I'd called each of them twice. All calls went straight to voicemail. At 8:10, the server approached, with a forced smile that couldn't mask his discomfort. "Would you perhaps like to order, ma'am? Or shall we wait a bit longer?" "Just a few more minutes," I replied with as much dignity as I could muster. "I'm sure they've just been delayed." While waiting, I absently scrolled through my social media feed, something I rarely did. That's when the notification appeared. A check-in post from Veronica at the Riverside Mansion, time-stamped just 30 minutes earlier. The caption read, "Celebrating another trip around the sun with the only family that matters. So blessed to have these amazing children in my life. Birthday girl, family first, blessed." The photo showed Veronica at the center of the table, my 3 children clustered around her, all raising glasses in a toast. Their spouses smiled politely in the background. Even my eldest grandchildren were present, dressed formally. My heart stopped. Veronica's birthday was in February. I remembered this clearly because it had been a point of contention during the divorce proceedings when gift ownership was disputed. Then I recalled with sickening clarity. Charles's birthday had been today, June 15th, the same as mine, a coincidence that had once delighted us both. After his death 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack, Veronica had apparently claimed his birth date as her own celebration, and my children had chosen her party over my milestone birthday. As I stared at the image, the maitre d' approached, hesitantly. "Mrs. Sullivan, the special cake you requested." He gestured discreetly, and I turned to see a server wheeling over an elegant cake decorated with "Happy 70th Birthday, Harriet" in delicate script. Erin had arranged it when confirming our reservation. "Would you like us to wrap it for you to take home?" the maitre d' asked gently. I gazed at the melting candles, the careful decoration, and made a decision that would set in motion everything that followed. "No," I said, gathering my purse and shawl. "Thank you, but I won't be needing it." I paid the exorbitant bill, adding a generous tip to compensate for the table that had remained empty all evening, and walked to my car with my head held high, despite the hollowness expanding in my chest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I didn't allow myself to break down until I was safely behind my own front door. Then I permitted exactly 15 minutes of tears before wiping my eyes and reaching for my phone. "Martin," I said when my attorney answered, "I need to make some changes to my will. How soon can we meet?" The next morning dawned with unsettling clarity. I'd slept surprisingly well after making my decision, as if some long-carried burden had finally been set down. I prepared my usual breakfast of toast and coffee, then sat at my small kitchen table overlooking the garden I'd lovingly cultivated since moving to this modest home after the divorce. For 42 years, I'd been the reliable center of our family universe. When Charles's business ventures failed, I kept us afloat with the bookstore. When the children needed braces, college tuition, wedding funds, down payments for their first homes, it was my careful financial planning that made it possible. Even after the divorce, I had continued being the safety net they never acknowledged. At precisely 9 a.m., I called Martin Goldstein, the attorney who had handled both my divorce and all my business matters since. "Can you come in this afternoon?" he asked after I explained my request. The concern in his voice was evident. "Harriet, are you sure you're all right?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied with surprising steadiness. "I'll see you at 2. I had just hung up when my phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided against it. Better to face this head on. "Mom?" Her voice carried that familiar tone, slightly breathless, perpetually busy Rebecca. "I'm so sorry about last night. There was this thing at Veronica's and it was so last minute. But Dad would have wanted us there and—" "I saw the photos," I interrupted, my voice calm. "On social media?" A beat of silence. "Oh, well, it wasn't planned that way. Veronica was feeling down about Dad's birthday, and Aaron thought we should all be there for her. You know how she gets." Yes, I did know. Veronica had perfected the art of emotional manipulation during the 15 years she'd been in our lives. First as my husband's mistress, then as his wife, and now, apparently, as the matriarch my children preferred. "It's fine, Rebecca," I said, surprising myself with how little emotion I felt. "You made your choice." "Don't be like that, Mom," she sighed. "We want to make it up to you." "Dinner this weekend? All of us, kids included. You pick the place." 2 days ago, I would have readily accepted this olive branch. I would have swallowed my hurt, rearranged my schedule, and expressed gratitude for whatever crumbs of attention they deigned to throw my way. But not today. "I'm afraid I have other plans this weekend," I said. "What plans?" The genuine confusion in her voice spoke volumes. In her mind, I existed solely to accommodate their schedules, to be available whenever they found time for me. "I'm meeting with a travel agent," I replied. "I've decided to take an extended trip, something I've been putting off for far too long." "A trip? Where? For how long?" Her questions tumbled over each other, tinged with something between concern and annoyance. "I'm thinking of starting with the Mediterranean. Greece has always called to me. After that, perhaps Italy, Spain. I haven't decided the full itinerary yet, but what about Madison's dance recital next month? And Elliot's summer league games? And who will watch the twins when Katherine and James go to that conference in August?" I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing the stunning realization that my daughter saw me primarily as a convenience, childcare on demand, audience for her children's activities, support staff for their busy lives. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said calmly. "People manage these things all the time without a grandmother at their beck and call." "Mom, this isn't like you," Rebecca said, her voice hardening. "Are you doing this to punish us for missing one dinner?" "It wasn't just any dinner, Rebecca. It was my 70th birthday." I let that sink in before continuing. "But no, this isn't about punishment. It's about finally prioritizing my own wishes after decades of putting everyone else first." "This is ridiculous," she muttered, and I could picture her pacing her sleek corner office downtown, designer heels clicking on the hardwood floors. "I need to get to a meeting. We'll talk about this later when you're thinking more clearly." After she hung up, I sat motionless, letting the implications of our conversation wash over me. My children viewed my independence as selfish, my self-care as punishment. They had grown so accustomed to my self-sacrifice that they considered it my natural state. At 2 o'clock, I sat across from Martin in his wood-paneled office. He listened intently as I outlined the changes I wanted to make to my estate plan. Let me make sure I understand correctly, he said when I finished. You want to create a living legacy foundation instead of leaving your assets directly to your children upon your death? That's right, I confirmed. The Sullivan Literary Legacy Foundation will hold most of my assets, including the bookstore chain. Each of my children will be offered positions on the board with modest stipends, but they'll need to actively participate in the foundation's work. And the foundation's purpose? Literacy programs in underserved communities, writing scholarships, support for independent bookstores struggling to compete with chains and online retailers, the things I've always been passionate about but couldn't fully pursue while building the business and raising a family. Martin nodded thoughtfully. And the monthly support payments you've been making to each household? Those stop immediately, I said firmly. Instead, I'll establish one-time financial gifts for each of them, enough to clear any existing debts and provide a reasonable cushion, but contingent upon completing financial literacy training. Martin made careful notes. What about the grandchildren's education funds? Those remain untouched, I said without hesitation. The children shouldn't suffer for their parents' attitudes. In fact, I'd like to include provisions for internships at the bookstores or foundation for any grandchild who shows interest. As Martin continued documenting my wishes, I felt a peculiar lightness spreading through me. For decades, I had defined myself by what I gave to others: financial support, emotional availability, constant accommodation. Finally, I was reclaiming my right to define myself by my own dreams and values. There's one more thing, I added as our meeting drew to a close. I'm going to be traveling extensively in the coming months. I'll need everything arranged so I can manage foundation business remotely when necessary. Martin looked up from his notes. Traveling? That sounds wonderful, Harriet. Where are you headed? Everywhere I've put off going, I said with my first genuine smile in days. Starting with Greece next month. Good for you, he said warmly. The paperwork should be ready for your signature by the end of next week. Will that work with your travel plans? I nodded, already mentally planning my itinerary. My phone had buzzed several times during our meeting, calls from Aaron and Katherine that I'd silenced. There would be time for those conversations later. As I drove home, I took a detour past Sullivan Literary's flagship store downtown. The afternoon sunlight caught the gold lettering on the storefront, making it shine against the brick facade. I had opened this location with trembling hands and a second mortgage 39 years ago, terrified but determined. Charles had called it a foolish indulgence, a hobby that would never support our family. Now it anchored a business worth millions, a legacy built by my persistence, vision, and countless 17-hour days. I had transformed my passion for literature into security for my family, opportunity for dozens of employees, and a cultural cornerstone for our community. And yet, my children had taken it all for granted, assuming their inheritance would arrive, intact regardless of how they treated its creator. They were about to discover how mistaken they had been. Back home, I found a package on my doorstep, a belated birthday gift from my sister Elaine in Arizona. Inside was a gorgeous leather-bound travel journal with a note. For all the adventures you've postponed, it's never too late to start writing new chapters. I traced my fingers over the supple cover, feeling as though the universe itself was confirming my decision. Tomorrow there would be difficult conversations with my children, explanations to my grandchildren, arrangements for the business during my absence. But tonight, I opened the blank journal and wrote on the first page, the beginning. The predicted. Storm arrived with the dawn. My phone began ringing at 7:15 a.m. Aaron, always the early riser among my children. I let it go to voicemail as I prepared for the day ahead. By 8:30, all three of them had called multiple times, left increasingly urgent messages, and sent a flurry of texts demanding that I answer the damn phone. Rebecca had evidently shared our conversation with her siblings, and they had closed ranks as they always did when feeling threatened. Once, this unified front had made me proud, evidence of the strong sibling bond I'd fostered. Now it felt like an alliance formed against me. At 9 a.m., I finally answered Katherine's call. "Mom," she began without preamble, her professor's voice laced with forced patience. "What's this about you going to Greece? Rebecca says you're acting strangely." "Good morning to you too, Katherine," I replied calmly. "I'm not acting strangely. I'm simply making decisions that prioritize my own wishes for a change." "Because we missed your birthday dinner?" The exasperation in her tone was unmistakable. "We've already apologized for that. It was unfortunate timing with Veronica's thing." "But it wasn't Veronica's birthday," I interrupted quietly. "It was your father's. She co-opted it, just as she's co-opted so many things over the years." A beat of silence followed. Had they truly not realized? Or simply not cared? Katherine faltered. "That's beside the point right now. Aaron says you've been meeting with Martin Goldstein. Something about changing your will?" So that was the real concern. Not my travel plans, but their inheritance. Of course, Martin's assistant would have mentioned our meeting to her husband, who golfed with Aaron every Thursday. Small towns held few secrets. "Yes," I confirmed. "I'm establishing a foundation. The Sullivan Literary Legacy Foundation." "A foundation?" She sounded genuinely confused. "What does that mean for the business? For what we expected would eventually—" At least she had the grace not to finish the sentence outright. "What they expected would eventually come to them. The foundation will hold most of my assets, including the bookstore chain," I explained. "You, Aaron, and Rebecca will have the opportunity to serve on the board if you wish." "Opportunity?" Katherine repeated. "Mom, we've always understood that we would inherit equal shares of the business. That's been the plan for decades." "Plans change," I said simply. "Priorities shift. Mine certainly have." "This is because of one missed dinner," she said flatly. "No, Katherine. The dinner was merely the moment I finally acknowledged what I've known for years, that I've allowed myself to become an afterthought in my children's lives. Your convenient babysitter, financial safety net, and eventual source of inheritance, but not someone whose milestone birthday warrants choosing me over Veronica." "That's unfair," she protested weakly. "Is it? When was the last time any of you asked about my dreams, my wishes? When have you considered that I might want more from my remaining years than waiting for your occasional visits and watching your children when convenient for you?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. "We should all sit down together and discuss this," she finally said. "Tonight. Aaron can host at his place." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," I replied. "I have dinner plans with Judith and Eleanor, my two oldest friends who had stood by me through the divorce and every challenge since." "Tomorrow, then," she pressed. "Fine," I conceded. "Tomorrow evening, but not at Aaron's, at the original bookstore downtown. 6 o'clock. After hanging up, I drove to Sullivan Literary's first location, now our smallest but still most beloved store. Margaret, the manager who had started as my assistant 30 years ago, looked up in surprise when I entered. "Harriet, I thought you were taking the day off. Happy belated birthday, by the way." "Thank you, Margaret." "Plans changed," I said, embracing her briefly. "I need to use the meeting room tomorrow evening. A family discussion." Something in my tone must have conveyed the significance because she simply nodded. "Of course. I'll make sure it's prepared." I spent the afternoon reviewing documents with my financial advisor, Bradford Williams. Unlike Martin, Bradford had no connections to my children's social circles and could be trusted with complete discretion. "These monthly transfers to your children's accounts," he observed, examining my financial records. "They've been going on for quite some time. 12 years for Aaron, 9 for Rebecca, 7 for Katherine. I confirmed. Initially to help with specific needs, Aaron's business expansion, Rebecca's home purchase after her divorce, Katherine's move for her professorship, but they continued long after those immediate needs passed. Bradford adjusted his glasses, and they've increased over time. They asked, and I gave, I said simply. It seemed easier than having them manage within their means. And now? Now they'll learn, I said firmly. The foundation will provide for literacy programs and community support, not lifestyle maintenance. For my adult children. They won't take this well, Bradford warned. No, I agreed. They won't. That evening, as predicted, Aaron showed up unannounced at my door. My eldest child had always been the most like his father, charming when it served him, forceful when charm failed. At 41, his once athletic frame had softened with prosperity, but he still carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. Mom, he said as I opened the door. Unlike his sisters, he didn't bother with pretense. What the hell are you doing? I stepped aside to let him in. Hello, Aaron. Would you like some tea? I don't want tea, he snapped, following me into the living room. I want to understand why you're suddenly threatening to disinherit us and jet off around the world. I'm not disinheriting you, I corrected, settling into my favorite armchair. I'm restructuring my assets in a way that better reflects my values. By creating some foundation instead of leaving the business to your own children? He paced the carpet, the same way he had as a teenager when arguing for a later curfew. We've been counting on those inheritances, Mom. I've made business decisions based on that expectation. There it was, the entitlement laid bare. He'd been making financial decisions based on money that wasn't yet his, might not be his for decades, and was never guaranteed to be his at all. That was unwise, I said calmly. Nothing in life is certain, Aaron. He stopped pacing and stared at me. This isn't like you. You've always put family first. I've always put everyone else first, I corrected gently. There's a difference. And now suddenly it's all about you? His voice rose. Your trips? Your foundation? Your wishes? Yes, I said simply. After 70 years, it's finally about me, too. Aaron's face flushed with anger. And what about your grandchildren? What about Madison and Elliot and the twins and little Zoe? Don't they deserve their grandmother's consideration? It was a low blow, using the children against me, but not unexpected. I'd anticipated this tactic. The children's education funds remain untouched, I assured him. Their futures are secure. What's changing is the expectation that I exist solely to support choices I never approved or agreed to. Like what? He challenged. Like your beach house in the Hamptons that you can't actually afford. Like Rebecca's private school tuition for Madison when the public schools in her district are excellent. Like Katherine and James both driving luxury cars while complaining about university salaries. Aaron had the grace to look slightly abashed. That's not fair. We've worked hard. So have I interrupted firmly. For much longer than any of you. And now I'm going to enjoy the fruits of that labor in ways that bring me joy and create a lasting legacy beyond material comforts for my children. We circled this argument for another 20 minutes before Aaron finally left, slamming the door behind him with a muttered comment about speaking tomorrow, when you're being more reasonable. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized I felt no guilt, no wavering in my resolve. Instead, I experienced something I hadn't felt in years, perhaps decades, the quiet certainty that I was finally acting in alignment with my deepest values rather than others' expectations. Tomorrow would bring confrontation with all 3 children together, likely more emotional manipulation and angry words. But for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't dreading conflict or planning compromises to keep the peace. I was standing firmly in my truth, and it felt like coming home to myself after a very long absence. The original Sullivan Literary Bookstore held memories in every corner. As I unlocked the front door at 5:30 p.m., The familiar scent of paper, coffee, and the faint sweetness of the lavender sachets Margaret tucked between display books welcomed me home. I'd chosen this location for our family meeting deliberately, to remind my children where everything had begun. This modest storefront, with its creaking wooden floors and hand-built shelves, had been my lifeline after college when jobs were scarce. I'd started as an assistant to old Mr. Winters, the original owner, eventually purchasing the struggling shop when he decided to retire. Charles had called it a sentimental mistake at the time. "Books are dying, Harriet," he'd said with the dismissive confidence that characterized many of his own failed business ventures. "You're throwing good money after bad." I ran my fingers along the oak counter, remembering those early days of 12-hour shifts, inventive marketing on a shoestring budget, and reading stories to neighborhood children while heavily pregnant with Aaron. This store had put food on our table when Charles's first business collapsed. It had funded braces, summer camps, and eventually college tuition for 3 children. From this single location, with determination and careful planning, I'd expanded to 7 stores across 3 states. Margaret had prepared the meeting room as requested. The small space at the back where we held author signings and book clubs now contained a polished conference table with 6 chairs. A carafe of coffee sat at the center alongside a plate of madeleines from the French bakery next door. A thoughtful touch from Margaret, who remembered they were Katherine's favorite. "Will you need anything else?" she asked, hovering at the doorway. "Just privacy," I replied with a grateful smile. "And perhaps moral support afterward." She squeezed my shoulder. "I'll keep the store open late. Come find me when they leave." My children arrived in stages. Katherine first, precisely on time as always, her academic punctuality a defining characteristic. She wore the slightly distracted expression of someone pulled from important work, though her eyes softened briefly as she took in the familiar surroundings. "I haven't been here in ages," she admitted, accepting a cup of coffee. "Not since that holiday event last year." Rebecca arrived 5 minutes late, immaculately dressed in business attire despite it being Saturday, her designer handbag a silent testament to her lifestyle choices. Aaron strolled in 15 minutes after the agreed time, not bothering with excuses for his tardiness, a habit he'd developed in adolescence and never outgrown. Once seated, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. They exchanged glances, clearly having coordinated their approach beforehand. Aaron, designated spokesperson, cleared his throat. "Mom, we've talked, and we think you're having some kind of delayed reaction to Dad's death." I raised an eyebrow but remained silent. "It's been 2 years," Katherine added gently. "But grief doesn't follow a timeline. Your sudden interest in travel, changing your will, these could be manifestations of unresolved emotions." "We're concerned," Rebecca interjected, reaching for my hand across the table. "First, you overreact to missing one dinner." "My 70th birthday," I corrected quietly. "Which we've apologized for repeatedly," she continued without acknowledging my correction. "Then you start making dramatic decisions about foundations and travel. It's not like you, Mom." I looked at each of their faces in turn. My children? Accomplished, intelligent adults who somehow still saw me as a supporting character in their narratives rather than the protagonist of my own life. "Have any of you ever asked yourselves why I never traveled?" I asked. "Why, despite building a successful business, I never took more than a week away? Why I haven't pursued my interest in rare book restoration, or accepted invitations to literary festivals, or visited the places I've read about my entire life?" They exchanged puzzled glances. "You were busy with the business," Aaron offered. "And you always said you preferred being close to home," Katherine added. "The business has been stable for years," I countered. "And as for preferring home, that was a practical necessity, not a preference. I stayed because one of you always needed something. Aaron's business expansion, Rebecca's divorce, Katherine's career move, the grandchildren's activities. Your father's absence and then his death. I straightened in my chair. I don't regret supporting you all. But I do regret allowing myself to become so essential to your comfort that you stopped seeing me as a person with my own dreams. That's not fair, Rebecca protested. We appreciate everything you've done. Do you? I asked mildly. When was the last time any of you asked about my aspirations? When have you encouraged me to pursue my interest rather than bend my schedule around your needs? The silence that followed was damning. As for the foundation, I continued, it's not an impulsive decision. I've been considering it for years, a way to ensure Sullivan Literary continues to serve the community even after I'm gone. The only recent change is my decision not to leave it directly to you three. But why? Aaron demanded, his patience visibly fraying. We're your children, your natural heirs. Being my children entitles you to my love, which you have unconditionally, I replied. It doesn't automatically entitle you to control over a business you've taken minimal interest in beyond its financial benefits to you. That's not true, Katherine argued. I've helped with author events. Aaron's construction company renovated the Cambridge location at cost. Rebecca's handled legal matters. Occasionally. When convenient, I acknowledged. But none of you has shown genuine passion for what Sullivan Literary represents to this community, or its potential beyond profit margins. I opened a folder I'd brought and slid copies of a document across the table to each of them. This outlines the foundation's structure and the roles available to you if you're interested. You'll each receive a one-time payment to clear existing debts and establish financial cushions. The grandchildren's education funds remain secure. Monthly subsidies, however, end immediately. Aaron scanned the document, his expression darkening. This is significantly less than what we would have received under your previous will. It's still substantial, I pointed out. More than most people see in a lifetime. The difference is that the business itself will serve a broader purpose through the foundation. And these mandatory financial management courses? Rebecca asked, looking offended as she pointed to a clause in the document. Non-negotiable, I confirmed. If you want the funds, you attend the training. All three of you have developed spending habits that exceed your considerable incomes because I've enabled it. That stops now. Katherine set her paper down carefully. And if we contest this? You're welcome to try, I responded evenly. Martin has ensured everything is legally sound. You'd spend fortunes on legal fees only to ultimately fail, depleting the very inheritance you're concerned about preserving. So that's it? Take it or leave it. Aaron's voice rose, his father's temper flaring in his flushed cheeks. Those are your options, yes. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. And you still plan to go gallivanting around the world while upending our lives? I plan to travel while I'm still healthy enough to enjoy it, I corrected. My first flight leaves for Athens next Thursday. I'll be gone at least 3 months. 3 months? Katherine echoed incredulously. What about Madison's fall piano recital? And Thanksgiving? Christmas? Even now, their concerns centered on holiday rituals and schedules I'd always rearranged my life to accommodate. I'll be available by video call, I said, and I'm sure Madison will appreciate recordings of her performance. This is ridiculous. Aaron pushed back from the table abruptly. You're punishing us over one missed dinner. No, I said firmly. I'm finally acknowledging decades of imbalance in our relationship. The dinner was merely the wake-up call I needed. When they left 30 minutes later, after cycling through anger, negotiation, and reluctant resignation, I felt oddly peaceful, despite the emotional turbulence. Margaret found me sitting alone in the meeting room, staring at the now empty chairs. How did it go? She asked gently. About as expected, I replied. They think I've lost my mind, or that I'm dying and haven't told them, or that this is an elaborate scheme to punish them. Margaret chuckled softly. And which is it? None of the above, I smiled. It's simply a woman of 70 reclaiming her right to live on her own terms. for whatever time she has left. Good for you, she said, squeezing my shoulder. For what it's worth, I think Charles would be shocked but also secretly impressed. He always admired your backbone when you chose to show it. Perhaps, I conceded, though his opinion stopped mattering to me the day he walked out with Veronica. As I drove home under a rising full moon, I felt lighter than I had in years. Tomorrow would bring more details to handle. Confirmations for my travels, final, paperwork with Martin, arrangements for the business during my absence. But tonight, the road ahead seemed to shimmer with possibilities, like a path opening into an unexplored landscape I'd only glimpsed in dreams and books. At 70, my life wasn't ending. It was finally, truly beginning. The week before my departure passed in a flurry of preparations. My travel agent, Sophia, a vibrant woman in her 50s who specialized in solo travel for seniors, had crafted an itinerary that balanced structured tours with ample free time for exploration. You'll start in Athens, she explained, spreading a detailed map across her desk. 3 days there to adjust to the time difference and see the essential sites. Then a small group island tour, Mykonos, Santorini, Crete, with local guides, who specialize in history and culture, not just tourist spots. I traced the blue routes between islands with my fingertip, feeling a thrill of anticipation. And after Greece? A short flight to Rome, she continued, flipping to the next page. Then Florence, Venice, with train travel between cities. You mentioned wanting to attend a cooking class in Tuscany, so I've arranged that here. She pointed to a 3-day stay at a family vineyard outside Siena. The comprehensiveness of the itinerary, plane tickets, hotel reservations, guided tours, cooking classes, even recommendations for local restaurants and bookshops, sparked both excitement and a flicker of anxiety. I had never been gone so long, had never ventured so far from home alone. It seems extensive, I murmured, scanning the 12-week schedule. Sophia studied me with understanding. Having second thoughts? Not about going, I clarified. Just wondering if I've lost my mind planning such an ambitious first trip at my age. She laughed warmly. Harriet, I just sent an 82-year-old former librarian on a hiking tour of Patagonia. You'll be exploring ancient civilizations and eating exceptional food, not scaling mountains. You've got this. Her confidence bolstered mine. I signed the final authorizations and left with a folder of confirmation documents, travel insurance papers, and recommendations for everything from comfortable walking shoes to the best travel adapters. Back home, my packing occupied several days, a process of selecting, discarding, and carefully weighing the balance between preparedness and practicality. I'd purchased a lightweight suitcase with smooth rolling wheels, comfortable walking sandals, and wrinkle-resistant clothing, in coordinating colors. My phone remained conspicuously silent throughout this period. After our meeting at the bookstore, my children had retreated to regroup. No doubt they were strategizing, consulting with their own financial advisors about the implications of my decisions, perhaps even considering legal challenges despite my warnings. Only my grandchildren reached out, sweet text messages and homemade cards delivered by mail, clearly orchestrated by their parents in an attempt to soften my resolve through emotional manipulation. I wasn't immune to the tugs on my heartstrings, especially from 7-year-old Zoe's misspelled note, "Don't go away, Grandma, who will make me pancakes." But beneath these innocent entreaties, I recognized my children's tactical approach. They were deploying their most effective weapons, my grandchildren's affection, to accomplish what their own arguments had failed to achieve. 3 days before my departure, Rebecca finally called. "Mom," she began without preamble, "the kids are devastated that you're leaving. Couldn't you at least postpone the trip until after the holidays? 6 months wouldn't make that much difference, and it would give us all time to adjust to these changes you're making." "The children will be fine," I assured her. "I've set up weekly video calls with each of them, and I've prepared small packages to be delivered while I'm gone. Postcards, local treats, small gifts from each destination. It's not the same. No, I agreed. It's not. But it's a valuable lesson in understanding that people we love have their own lives and dreams. They'll learn that Grandma isn't disappearing forever, just having adventures to share with them when she returns. Rebecca's sigh carried echoes of her teenage exasperation. You're really doing this, aren't you? The trip, the foundation, all of it. Yes, I am. A long pause followed. Then, Aaron consulted with a lawyer friend about contesting the changes to your will. I assumed he might. The lawyer said it would be difficult to challenge successfully, given your obvious mental competence. Her tone turned wry. Apparently, being assertive and independent-minded doesn't qualify as diminished capacity. Imagine that, I replied, unable to suppress a small smile. We're still not happy about this, she continued, her voice softening slightly. But I've been thinking about what you said, about us never asking about your dreams. You're right. I can't remember ever asking what you wanted beyond the family and the business. This unexpected acknowledgement caught me off guard. Thank you for recognizing that. I still think you're being extreme, she clarified quickly. But I get it. A little. It wasn't a full acceptance of my decisions, but it was a crack in the unified front of opposition, a willingness to see, however dimly, my perspective. From Rebecca, who had always been the most rigid of my children, this represented significant movement. I'd like to drive you to the airport, she offered tentatively. If that's okay. I'd appreciate that, I said, genuinely touched by this. Olive branch. The day before my departure, I visited each of the bookstores. Margaret would oversee operations during my absence, with monthly reports sent to my email and emergency protocols in place. But beyond these practical arrangements, I wanted to say proper goodbyes to the staff who had become like extended family over the years. At the flagship store downtown, Eliza, who had started as a teenage shelver 20 years ago and now managed our most profitable location, hugged me tightly. Bring back stories, she whispered. We'll have a special event when you return, the bookseller's odyssey or something equally pretentious. I laughed. I'll keep a journal. Good, she nodded firmly. Because we're all living vicariously. Through you, Harriet. Do you know how many of us have secret travel bucket lists we never act on? You're our hero for actually doing it. Her words stayed with me as I completed my rounds, hearing variations of the same sentiment from other staff members. I had never considered myself particularly brave or inspirational. I had simply run my business, raised my family, and endured my share of hardships with as much grace as I could muster. Yet now, approaching 70, my decision to prioritize my own dreams was being viewed as an act of courage by women decades younger than myself. What did that say about the expectations and limitations we internalize as women, as mothers, as the responsible ones who keep everything running smoothly for everyone else? My final stop was the original store, where Margaret waited with a small gift, a leather bookmark embossed with my initials and the words, "Every journey begins with a single page." For your travel journal, she explained, so you don't lose your place in your own story. That night, I stood in my bedroom surveying the closed suitcase, my travel documents arranged neatly on the dresser, the house clean and prepared for my extended absence. My neighbor Edward would collect mail and keep an eye on the property, though the security system and cameras provided additional peace of mind. I opened the travel journal Elaine had given me for my birthday, with its creamy, blank pages waiting to be filled. On the first page, where I had previously written only the beginning, I now added, "Tomorrow I board a plane to Athens. 70 years of life behind me, and only now am I truly setting forth. What wonders and challenges await an old bookseller venturing into the wider world? What will I discover about ancient civilizations, modern cultures, and most importantly, about myself when removed from the familiar roles and responsibilities that have defined me for decades. The answer lies beyond the horizon. All I need is the courage to step forward and claim it. I closed the journal, turned out the light, and slept more soundly than I had in years. Athens unfolded before me like a familiar book I'd never actually read. The taxi from the airport wound through crowded streets, past sun-bleached buildings and sudden glimpses of ancient ruins rising incongruously amid modern concrete. My small hotel, tucked into a quiet street near the Plaka district, welcomed me with cool marble floors and a rooftop terrace that offered a breathtaking view of the Acropolis. "First time in Greece?" asked Marina, the hotel manager, as she handed me my room key. "First time anywhere," I admitted. "I've spent 70 years reading about the world. Now I'm finally seeing it." Her eyes crinkled warmly. "Then you must let us make special recommendations. Not just the tourist places, but the real Athens." That first evening, too wired from travel to sleep despite my exhaustion, I sat on the rooftop terrace watching the Parthenon illuminate against the darkening sky. The scale of it, the perfect proportions visible even at a distance, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. How many times had I sold books about this very site, arranged displays featuring these monuments, discussed Greek history with customers? Yet nothing had prepared me for the visceral impact of actually being here, breathing the same air that had circulated around Socrates and Plato. I pulled out my phone to share this moment, my finger automatically hovering over my children's contact information before I paused. Our strained parting hadn't invited such casual communication. Rebecca had indeed driven me to the airport as promised, our conversation polite but superficial. Aaron had sent a terse text that morning. "Safe travels. We'll talk when you return." Katherine had called the night before, her tone carefully neutral as she confirmed the contact information for emergencies. Instead, I opened my email and sent a brief message to Margaret at the bookstore, describing the view and my first impressions. Then, surprising myself, I created a new email addressed to all the staff across our 7 locations. "Greetings from Athens, where this old bookseller has finally stepped into the settings of so many beloved classics. The Acropolis is more magnificent than any photograph could capture, and tomorrow I'll walk the ancient agora where democracy was born. I'll be sending regular updates from my travels if you're interested. Consider it a serialized travelogue. From your absentee employer. First lesson learned. Greek taxi drivers make Boston traffic look orderly by comparison." I attached a photo of the illuminated Parthenon and sent it before I could reconsider. It felt slightly presumptuous to assume my staff would care about my personal adventures, yet Eliza's words about vicarious travel resonated with me. Perhaps my journey could serve as something more than mere self-indulgence. The next 3 days passed in a blur of exploration. My small tour group consisted of 8 travelers, all over 60, led by Nikos, a passionate archaeologist who brought ancient sites to life with vivid stories rather than dry historical recitations. We walked the sprawling ruins of the Agora, climbed the steps to the Parthenon, marveled at the precision of ancient engineering in the Temple of Hephaestus. Between scheduled tours, I wandered the narrow streets of the Plaka, discovering tiny bookshops with multilingual offerings, sampling olive oils and honey in small family-owned stores, and learning to order simple meals in halting Greek phrases. On my 3rd evening, I checked my email to find 23 responses from bookstore employees across the network. They ranged from brief encouragements, "Keep the photos coming, Harriet," and "Living the dream," to thoughtful questions about specific sites and Greek literature. Margaret had forwarded my message to the all-staff list, adding, "Our fearless leader has embarked on her odyssey. Let's show her our support." Unexpectedly moved by this chorus of enthusiasm, I spent 2 hours crafting a more detailed response, sharing observations about everything from the surprising predominance of stray cats in Athens to the reverent hush that fell over our tour group inside the Parthenon Museum when facing the original caryatids. I attached several photos and ended with a promise to continue these dispatches throughout my journey. What began as a casual update transformed, over the subsequent weeks, into a ritual. Every third evening, regardless of where I was, I composed a lengthy email to the Sullivan literary community. As I traveled from Athens to the Greek islands, the windmills of Mykonos, the breathtaking caldera of Santorini, the ancient palaces of Crete, my travelogue grew increasingly personal. I found myself sharing not just observations about architecture and history, but reflections on how this journey was changing me. From Santorini, I wrote, "Today I hiked the volcanic rim from Fira to Oya, a 3-hour trek along cliffside paths with the most spectacular views imaginable. At several points, the trail became challenging, narrow and steep with loose stones underfoot. 2 decades of gardening and shelving books have kept me reasonably fit, but I'm still a 70-year-old woman with arthritic knees." I considered turning back at one particularly daunting section when a young British couple behind me offered encouragement. "You're doing brilliantly," the woman called. Her companion nodded, adding, "My gran wouldn't attempt half of this." Their words, though kindly meant, sparked something stubborn in me. I didn't want to be someone's idea of a plucky old lady exceeding diminished expectations. So I continued, step by careful step, and when we reached Oya 3 hours later, I felt a kind of triumph I haven't experienced since opening our 7th store location. The magnificent sunset over the caldera was my reward, all the more beautiful, for having been earned through persistence. Is there a metaphor here about late-life journeys? Perhaps, but mostly I'm just proud of these old knees and grateful for hiking poles. The responses multiplied with each dispatch. Staff began sharing my emails with customers who asked about my absence, and soon regular patrons were requesting to be added to the distribution list. Margaret called me in Crete to report that my fan club now numbered over 100 people, including several book club groups who discussed my latest updates during their meetings. "You've become our own personal travel writer," she laughed. "There's talk of compiling your emails into a small book when you return. The Late Blooming Adventurer, A Bookseller Abroad, or something equally charming." I dismissed the idea as absurd, yet found myself taking more care with each composition, refining my observations, researching historical details I'd half remembered, capturing the sensory experiences of each location. The taste of fresh-pressed olive oil in a Cretan village, the sound of bells echoing across Santorini's whitewashed buildings at dusk, the feel of ancient marble worn smooth by millions of hands over centuries. From my staff's enthusiastic responses, I sensed I was providing something beyond mere entertainment or distraction. Many wrote of being inspired to reconsider their own postponed dreams, to question self-imposed limitations. Sandra, our accountant who had worked for Sullivan Literary for 15 years, confessed she had finally enrolled in Italian classes at the community college, a step toward her long-deferred hope of visiting her ancestral homeland. "If you can, reinvent yourself at 70, she wrote. "Surely I can begin at 53. When I moved on to Italy in the 5th week of my journey, I carried this unexpected sense of purpose alongside my growing confidence as a traveler. What had begun as a personal declaration of independence had somehow transformed into something larger, a quiet rebellion against the cultural expectation that women of a certain age should confine themselves to familiar routines and sideline roles in other people's stories. Each step on ancient stones, each unfamiliar phrase practiced until it became pronounceable, each moment of uncertainty navigated successfully, became a tiny reclamation of possibilities I had set aside decades ago. The woman who stood gazing up at the Colosseum as the Roman sunset gilded its arches bore my name and face, but she was becoming someone I had never allowed myself to be. Free, curious, unbound by others' expectations, and increasingly certain She would never again shrink herself to fit within the narrow confines of the role she had played for so long. Rome embraced me with chaotic warmth, a city where ancient monuments stood shoulder to shoulder with bustling cafes and beeping scooters. My hotel in the Monte district placed me within walking distance of the Colosseum, yet tucked away on a quiet cobblestone street where locals hung laundry from balconies and neighborhood cats lounged in patches of afternoon sun. Unlike my Greek journey with its structured group tours, I'd arranged for more independence in Italy. After experiencing the confidence that came with successfully navigating Athens and the islands, I wanted the freedom to follow my own curiosities here. I hired private guides only for specific sites, otherwise allowing myself the luxury of wandering. On my second morning, I sat at a tiny corner cafe, savoring the perfect simplicity of espresso and a fresh cornetto while watching Rome awaken. My phone buzzed, an email notification from Margaret with the subject line, "Updates from home, all good." The business was thriving in my absence. My regular travel dispatches had created unexpected publicity for Sullivan Literary, drawing new customers curious about the bookstores owned by that adventurous older woman traveling through Europe. Our online sales had increased by 17%, with a particular surge in travel literature and classics set in Mediterranean locations. More surprising were the messages from my children. After weeks of minimal contact, brief acknowledgments of my email updates, perfunctory responses to my video calls with the grandchildren, they had each reached out to Margaret independently. "Aaron stopped by the flagship store yesterday," she wrote. "He spent nearly an hour asking about operations, inventory systems, and our community programs, showing more genuine interest in the business than he has in years. Katherine has offered to host a series of academic lectures on ancient literature at the Cambridge location. And Rebecca called with questions about the foundation structure, specifically the literacy programs we're developing." I set down my coffee cup, unsure how to interpret this information. Was this sincere interest or strategic positioning? An attempt to demonstrate their worthiness as inheritors, or the beginning of genuine engagement with the legacy I'd built? In other news, Margaret's email continued, "Your bookseller abroad dispatches have taken on a life of their own. Customers are requesting printed copies of previous emails they've missed. Eliza suggested creating a special display featuring books you've mentioned in your travels, and several people have asked if you're planning a formal presentation or book signing upon your return." I nearly laughed aloud at the absurdity. The idea that my personal journey, undertaken as an act of long overdue self-reclamation, would generate public interest seemed preposterous. Yet the evidence suggested otherwise. Rather than feeling pressured by this unexpected attention, I found it oddly liberating. For decades, I'd carefully maintained the image of steady, reliable Harriet, the practical businesswoman, the dependable mother and grandmother, the community fixture who could be counted on for support but never caused ripples. Now, from thousands of miles away, I was creating ripples without even trying, simply by living authentically. That afternoon, as I walked the ancient stones of the Roman Forum under a brilliant blue sky, I composed a mental response to Margaret. I would acknowledge this unexpected development with humor and grace, neither rejecting the interest nor allowing it to shape my continuing journey. This trip remained, at its core, a gift to myself, not content creation or a public performance. My reverie was interrupted by the buzz of an incoming call. Katherine's name appeared on my screen. I stepped into the shade of a towering cypress and answered. "Mom? Are you able to talk?" Her voice carried an unusual hesitancy. "I'm at the Roman Forum," I replied. "But yes, I can talk. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she assured me quickly. I read your latest email, the one about the cooking class in Tuscany." I had written that dispatch 2 days earlier, describing a day spent in a centuries-old stone kitchen learning to make pasta from scratch with an Italian grandmother who spoke no English, but communicated everything necessary through expressive gestures and occasional raps on knuckles for improperly rolled dough. "What about it?" I asked, when Katherine didn't continue. "You wrote about how Signora Ricci reminded you of your mother, Grandma Eleanor, and how you wished you'd paid more attention when she tried to teach you her recipes." Katherine's voice softened. "I never knew you felt that way. You've always seemed so complete, so satisfied with your choices." The observation caught me off guard. Had I really projected such contentment all these years? "I suppose we all have regrets," I said carefully. "Things we wish we'd done differently." "Like what?" she pressed. "What else do you regret, Mom?" The question hung between us, spanning continents. In the distance, a tour guide's voice rose and fell in Italian cadences as a group of schoolchildren followed obediently behind her raised umbrella. "I regret," I began slowly, "not taking more chances, not traveling sooner, not pursuing my interest in book restoration, not standing up to your father more often." I paused, then added the truth I'd never spoken aloud. "And sometimes, I regret making myself so available to everyone else that I became invisible as anything other than a resource." Katherine's silence felt weighted with recognition. "That's how we treated you, isn't it?" she finally said. "Like a resource. Always there, always reliable, always putting your own needs last." "It's a role I allowed myself to inhabit," I acknowledged. "One I reinforced through my own choices." "Still," she sighed, "reading your travel emails has been illuminating. There's so much about you I never knew, never asked about. Interests and thoughts and observations I never bothered to discover." The admission, so close to what I'd longed to hear for years, loosened something tight within my chest. Not quite forgiveness, that would require more than a single conversation, but the beginning of a path toward it. "It's not too late," I offered, "to ask those questions, to know each other differently." "Like what?" she pressed. "What else do you regret, Mom?" The question hung between us, spanning continents. In the distance, a tour guide's voice rose and fell in Italian cadences as a group of schoolchildren followed obediently behind her raised umbrella. "I regret," I began slowly, "not taking more chances, not traveling sooner, not pursuing my interest in book restoration, not standing up to your father more often." I paused, then added the truth I'd never spoken aloud. "And sometimes, I regret making myself so available to everyone else that I became invisible as anything other than a resource." Katherine's silence felt weighted with recognition. "That's how we treated you, isn't it?" she finally said. "Like a resource. Always there, always reliable, always putting your own needs last." "It's a role I allowed myself to inhabit," I acknowledged. "One I reinforced through my own choices." "Still," she sighed, "reading your travel emails has been illuminating. There's so much about you I never knew, never asked about. Interests and thoughts and observations I never bothered to discover." The admission, so close to what I'd longed to hear for years, loosened something tight within my chest. Not quite forgiveness, that would require more than a single conversation, but the beginning of a path toward it. "It's not too late," I offered, "to ask those questions, to know each other differently." "I'd like that," Katherine said quietly. "When you return." She stopped abruptly. "Actually, that's partly why I called. James and I have been thinking about bringing the twins to meet you in Paris for your final week there, if that wouldn't disrupt your plans too much." The suggestion startled me. My itinerary would take me through Florence, Venice, and eventually to France, with Paris as my final destination before flying home in late August. "The twins have been studying French in school," Katherine continued when I didn't immediately respond. "And they miss you terribly." We thought, well, it could be a special experience for them. For all of us. I gazed across the ancient forum, where centuries of history layered upon themselves in stone and memory. Emperors had walked these paths, orators had changed the course of civilization with words spoken in this very space. Vast empires had risen and fallen while this endured. Family relationships, too, could transform, collapse under their own weight, or strengthen through careful reconstruction. "I'd like that very much," I said at last. "Paris in August is magnificent." After Guy, we disconnected. I stood motionless amid the ruins, processing the small miracle of this exchange, not a complete reconciliation, not an undoing of decades of imbalance, but a first step toward something new. That evening, I composed my regular travelogue with particular care, knowing my audience now included not just my staff and customers, but my children, reading with fresh eyes and perhaps, at last, genuine curiosity about the woman behind the roles they had taken for granted for so long. "Today, I walked where Cicero once delivered speeches that changed the course of history," I wrote. "The weight of time feels different here in Rome, more layered, more complex than in Greece. Here, civilizations built directly atop one another, each generation using the stones of their predecessors to create something new, yet connected to what came before. Perhaps that's true of all our lives as well. We build our present and future using the materials of our past, repurposing old patterns into new possibilities when we have the courage to reimagine them." As I sent the email into the digital ether, I realized I was not just documenting my journey, but actively creating it with each choice, each step, each word. The story of Harriet Sullivan was still being written, not by obligations or others' expectations, but by my own hand at last. Florence enveloped me in Renaissance splendor, a city where artistic genius seemed embedded in every stone and fresco. In my third day there, I stood before Botticelli's Birth of Venus in the Uffizi Gallery, mesmerized by colors that remained vibrant after 5 centuries. The goddess's serene face, emerging from the sea into an existence she hadn't chosen yet, embraced with quiet dignity, resonated with me in unexpected ways. "Magnificent, isn't it?" said a voice beside me. I turned to find an elegant woman approximately my age, her silver hair styled in a fashionable bob, bright blue eyes examining the painting with obvious expertise. "Breathtaking," I agreed. "Though I confess I'm partial to his Primavera in the next gallery," she smiled, offering her hand. Diana Thornfield, art history professor emerita from Columbia University, now full-time wanderer. Harriet Sullivan, bookstore owner from Massachusetts, recent convert to wandering. Within minutes, we were deep in conversation about Renaissance techniques and mythology as we moved through the galleries. Later, over lunch at a trattoria tucked away from tourist paths, Diana and I exchanged condensed versions of our life stories. She'd been widowed early, raised 2 daughters alone while building an academic career, and upon retirement 5 years ago had sold her Manhattan apartment to fund extended travel. "I live nowhere and everywhere now," she explained, breaking off a piece of crusty bread. 3 months here, 2 months there. I keep a small storage unit in New York with winter clothes and family mementos, but otherwise, everything I need fits in 2 suitcases. "Doesn't that feel untethered?" I asked, both intrigued and slightly alarmed by her nomadic existence. Diana laughed. "After decades of being tethered by responsibilities, mortgage payments, committee meetings, my daughter's needs, untethered feels magnificent, though I suspect it's not for everyone." I considered her words as we sipped local wine beneath a striped awning. "My children would say it's definitely not for me. They're still adjusting to my taking this trip at all." "Ah, yes," Diana nodded knowingly. "Adult children have remarkably fixed ideas about who their parents are, or rather, who they should remain. Change disrupts their sense of security." "Exactly," I agreed, surprised by how perfectly she'd articulated what I'd been experiencing. "Though recently, there's been some movement. My younger daughter wants to meet me in Paris with her children." "Progress," Diana declared, raising her glass in a toast. To children who eventually recognize their parents as fully dimensional humans. We spent the afternoon exploring Florence together, with Diana's expertise enhancing every view. She knew which obscure churches housed overlooked masterpieces, which gelateria served the most authentic pistachio, which rooftop bars offered the best views of the Duomo at sunset. By evening, when we exchanged contact information with promises to meet again in Venice, where our itineraries would overlap, I realized I'd made my first true friend of this journey. It struck me as I returned to my hotel that this was exactly the kind of spontaneous connection I'd never allowed myself in my previous life. Schedules packed with responsibilities had left no room for serendipitous friendships, for afternoons that unfolded without planning, for the unexpected pleasures of finding a kindred spirit in a foreign land. That night, I added Diana to my email list for travel dispatches and received an enthusiastic response almost immediately. Harriet, your written voice is as delightful as your in-person conversation. I'm honored to join your readers. Perhaps someday these thoughtful observations will become something more formal? I know several people in publishing who would be interested in a different kind of travel memoir, one that explores late-life awakening alongside ancient ruins and Renaissance art. I dismissed the suggestion with a laugh, yet saved the email rather than deleting it. Diana wasn't the first to hint that my reflections might have value beyond my immediate circle. At 70, I'd begun this journey seeking personal liberation, not a new career. Yet the idea nestled in the back of my mind, not quite dismissed. The next morning brought an unexpected email from Rebecca. Formal in tone, it contained information about financial markets that might affect my investment portfolio, followed by several paragraphs updating me on Madison's summer activities in school, preparations for fall. Beneath the surface details, I sensed an attempt at connection, awkward and constrained by her professional habits, but sincere. I responded with equal care, sharing observations about the Florentine banking system that had financed the Renaissance. Knowing her interest in financial history, I attached a photo of a street performer Madison might enjoy, a young woman creating enormous iridescent bubbles that floated above delighted children in the Piazza della Repubblica. Small bridges being built between our separate worlds. Venice arrived like a dream, a city improbably beautiful, balanced on wooden pilings driven into mud centuries ago. My hotel, a converted 15th-century palazzo on a small canal, featured frescoed ceilings and windows that opened to the gentle lapping of water against stone foundations. Diana met me as promised, and together we explored the labyrinthine streets and bridges, deliberately losing ourselves in neighborhoods far from the crowded tourist centers. The best way to experience Venice is to abandon all sense of direction, she advised as we wandered into a tiny square where elderly Venetian men played cards at outdoor tables, while neighbors exchanged gossip from adjacent windows. The worst that can happen is you reach water and have to turn around. In the evenings, we attended concerts in ancient churches where Vivaldi's music returned to its birthplace, the notes soaring through spaces built for transcendence. During the days, we alternated between cultural immersion and simple pleasures. Mornings, in the Accademia Gallery or Doge's Palace, afternoons lingering over long lunches or floating on vaporettos through the Grand Canal. One evening, after a particularly moving chamber music performance, Diana and I sipped Prosecco at a quiet bar, tucked away in Dorsoduro. Our conversation turned philosophical as the golden Venetian light faded to dusk. "What surprised you most?" I asked her. "About this life you've created?" She considered the question carefully. "That happiness requires less than we think. For decades, I was convinced I needed certainty, stability, permanent arrangements. Now I find joy in temporary connections, beautiful moments that aren't diminished by being fleeting." She swirled the bubbles in her glass thoughtfully. "And you? What has surprised you most about stepping away from your established life?" How quickly the supposed void filled with unexpected richness. I replied without hesitation. I feared there would be nothing beyond the roles I'd played for so long. Instead, I've discovered there was an entire self waiting to emerge. One with opinions and interests I'd forgotten or never developed. Exactly, Diana nodded emphatically. Society tells women our age that we're gradually disappearing, becoming less relevant, less visible. What a magnificent surprise to discover that we're actually becoming more ourselves, more distilled, more authentic, less concerned with external validation. That night, I wrote my longest travel dispatch yet, weaving reflections on Venetian history with insights from my conversations with Diana. I described how the city had reinvented itself repeatedly over centuries, from naval superpower to commercial, center to tourist destination, without losing its essential character. Perhaps that's the art we're all practicing at this stage of life, I wrote. Reinvention that honors what came before while embracing new possibilities. Venice reminds us that adaptation isn't surrender, it's survival transformed into art. The Tiad? Responses arrived quickly, with more personal reflections than usual from my growing readership. Several women in their 60s and 70s shared their own stories of late-life reinvention. Retirement careers pursued, creative passions rekindled, long-deferred dreams finally acknowledged. Even Aaron, usually constrained in his communications, sent a thoughtful response about architectural preservation and economic evolution that showed he'd engaged deeply with my observations. As my time in Venice drew to a close, Diana and I said goodbye with promises to reunite in Portugal the following spring, a plan that would have seemed improbable to me just months earlier. "Keep writing, Harriet," she urged as we embraced on the dock where her water taxi waited. "You're giving voice to an experience many women share, but few articulate so eloquently." On my final morning, I woke early and walked to the Rialto Bridge. Before the day's crowds arrived, the Grand Canal stretched before me, its surface a mirror reflecting centuries of human ambition, creativity, and resilience. A city that should not logically exist had not only survived, but flourished through plague, war, and environmental challenges. I thought of my own unlikely flourishing, how the painful rejection of my 70th birthday had catalyzed a transformation I would never have predicted. How endings often concealed beginnings. How limitation could, paradoxically, become liberation when viewed through a different lens. As I prepared to leave for my final destination, Paris, where Katherine and the twins would join me, I felt neither the wistful nostalgia of a vacation ending nor the anxious anticipation of family reunion. Instead, I experienced the steady confidence of a woman who had expanded beyond old boundaries and could never again be contained by them. The journey was changing me in ways both subtle and profound. The Harriet who would meet her daughter and grandchildren in Paris was not the same woman they had stood up 6 months earlier. And that, I realized with quiet certainty, was precisely the point. Paris greeted me with gentle August sunshine and the scent of fresh bread from the boulangerie beneath my rented apartment in the Marais. I'd chosen this location carefully, a second-floor walk-up with tall windows overlooking a quiet courtyard, close enough to major attractions for convenience, yet nestled in a neighborhood where actual Parisians lived and worked. The two-bedroom space would accommodate Katherine and the twins comfortably when they arrived in 3 days. After weeks of constant movement through Greece and Italy, I welcomed this final pause to settle into one place. I established small routines that felt luxurious in their simplicity. Morning coffee at the cafe on the corner where the owner soon recognized me with a friendly, "Bonjour, Madame Sullivan." Afternoon walks along the Seine with no destination beyond the pleasure of observation. Evenings reading on my tiny balcony as the city lights gradually illuminated around me. My daily dispatches to the Sullivan literary community had evolved into something more personal than travelogue. Readers responded not just to descriptions of Parisian landmarks, but to reflections on solitude, reinvention, and the strange courage that sometimes emerges only in our later years. "There's a particular freedom in walking these streets alone at 70, I wrote one evening. I navigate entirely by my own curiosities, lingering before shop windows that intrigue me, sitting in gardens that invite contemplation, entering small museums on impulse. No one's schedule to consider, no one's patience to exhaust, no one's preferences to balance against my own. Is this selfishness or simply self-recognition after decades of compromise? Perhaps the distinction matters, less than I once believed. The night before Catherine's arrival, I received an unexpected email from Aaron. Unlike his previous brief acknowledgments of my travel updates, this message extended across several paragraphs. Mom, I've been thinking about that small bookshop you described in Venice, the one with the resident cat and ceiling-high shelves accessed by rolling ladders. It reminded me of something I'd completely forgotten. How you used to take me to the original Sullivan Literary location when I was maybe 5 or 6, before Rebecca was born. You'd set me up with picture books in that blue beanbag chair while you worked, and sometimes you'd let me climb the ladder to retrieve inventory from high shelves, holding the bottom steady and telling me I was your special helper. I remember feeling so important, so trusted. It's strange what memories surface when given the space to emerge. I've been reading your travel dispatches with increasing interest, not just for the descriptions of places I may never see, but for glimpses of the woman my mother is beyond that role. I'm beginning to understand that I've defined you too narrowly for too long. Construction begins next week on the renovation of the Cambridge store. I've personally reviewed the plans, suggested some modifications to better preserve the original architectural details you've always valued, and will be overseeing the project myself rather than delegating to my team. I want to get this right. For you? I read the message twice, recognizing the effort it represented for my most stubbornly resistant child. Aaron, who had most resembled his father in temperament, had never been one for emotional introspection or acknowledgement of fault. This tentative reaching across the divide between us felt significant, a small bridge being constructed from materials neither of us had previously recognized as valuable. My reply thanked him for his thoughtfulness regarding the renovation and shared my own memory of those early days. How his small presence had brought comfort during the terrifying early months of business ownership. How his childish questions had sometimes provided clarity when I felt overwhelmed by adult complexities. Perhaps, I concluded, we are finally learning to see each other as full people, not just as roles we've played in each other's stories. I look forward to continuing this conversation when I return. Catherine's arrival transformed my solitary Parisian existence. The twins, Emma and Ethan, tumbled into my apartment with 11-year-old energy, filling the space with exclamations, questions, and the particular chaos only pre-adolescence can generate. Katherine followed with luggage and apologetic smiles, her academic composure momentarily disrupted by maternal logistics. "Grandma!" Emma flung herself into my arms with unrestrained affection. "Your apartment is so French. Can we see the Eiffel Tower from here? Will we eat snails? Can we go to the catacombs where all the skeletons are?" Ethan, slightly more reserved than his sister but equally curious, examined the bookshelves where I'd arranged my growing collection of European literature purchased throughout my journey. "Did you really ride a gondola in Venice? Did you keep a travel journal like you said in your emails? Can I see it?" Katherine watched this enthusiastic reunion with visible relief. "They've talked of nothing else for weeks," she admitted as we settled at the kitchen table with tea while the twins explored the apartment. I was concerned they'd built up expectations no reality could match. "I'm just their grandmother," I reminded her, "not a magical Parisian tour guide." "You're not just anything anymore, Mom," she said with surprising directness. "You've become something else these past months, something beyond the roles we've assigned you. It's been—" She searched for the right word. "Illuminating to witness, even from a distance." The following days unfolded in a balance of tourist activities and quieter moments. We visited the expected landmarks, the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame's reconstruction, the Louvre, where the twins alternately complained of tired feet and marveled, at treasures from civilizations they'd only encountered in school books. Between these excursions, we discovered small pleasures. A hidden playground where Ethan and Emma made temporary friends despite language barriers. A patisserie where we developed a daily habit of selecting elaborate desserts. A second-hand bookshop where I found a rare edition of Colette's works Katherine had sought for years. On our third evening, while the twins were absorbed in a French cartoon I'd found on television, Katherine and I shared a bottle of wine on the balcony. The conversation, initially focused on practical matters of their visit, gradually shifted toward more personal territory. "I've been reading your journals," she admitted, refilling our glasses. "The handwritten ones from the divorce years that you kept in your study. I found them when helping Margaret organize some paperwork from home." I stiffened slightly. Those journals contained raw emotions I'd never intended to share. Anger, despair, fears for the future after Charles's betrayal and departure. "I should have asked permission," she acknowledged, noting my reaction. "But I'm glad I didn't, because you probably would have refused. And I needed to understand what you went through back then, what we were too young or self-absorbed to see." "Why now?" I asked quietly. She gazed across the rooftops where the last light was fading from the sky. "Because your emails made me realize how little I know you. The woman writing those thoughtful reflections about Renaissance art and Greek philosophy, the woman making friends with retired professors in Italian cafes, she seemed like a stranger. Yet she's been there all along, hasn't she? Behind the mother who helped with our homework and came to our graduations and sorted out our financial messes." I considered her words carefully. "I didn't disappear, if that's what you're asking. I simply prioritized differently, made choices that seemed necessary at the time, at significant cost to yourself," Katherine added softly. "The journals make that clear. You gave up so much. Professional opportunities, personal interests, even friendships that didn't fit with your responsibilities to us. That's what parents do," I said simply. "To a point, yes. But we continued taking long after childhood ended. We expected your sacrifices without question or gratitude." She set down her wine glass decisively. "I've been complicit in diminishing you, Mom. We all have." The directness of her acknowledgement caught me off guard. Of my 3 children, I had always considered Katherine the most perceptive. Yet she too had participated in the family pattern of taking my availability for granted, of seeing me primarily through the lens of what I could provide. "What changed?" I asked. "Besides the obvious disruption to the established order." "Watching you reclaim yourself," she said without hesitation. "Reading your travel writings. Seeing you step into a life of your own making without apology." She smiled ruefully. "And yes, the abrupt removal of financial subsidies we'd come to depend on. Nothing clarifies priorities quite like having to manage within one's actual means." We sat in companionable silence as lights blinked on across the Parisian skyline. From inside the apartment came the sounds of the twins laughing at their cartoon, oblivious to the reconciliation occurring just beyond the balcony doors. "Rebecca's been meeting with a financial advisor," Katherine said eventually. "Learning to budget properly for the first time in her adult life. It's been challenging for her, but necessary. And Aaron, working more hours, fewer golf games. The foundation requirements have been good for him. He's discovering he actually enjoys the literacy program work. Says it reminds him of when you used to read to him as a child." I absorbed this information, feeling neither vindication nor regret, only a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes growth requires disruption. My decision to restructure my assets had forced my children toward greater self-sufficiency and, perhaps, a more honest relationship with both money and their mother. "Will you continue traveling after this?" Katherine asked, gesturing toward the Parisian night as if it represented all the possibilities that remained unexplored. "Not immediately," I replied. "The business needs my attention for a while. But, yes, there will be more journeys. Diana, my friend from Florence and Venice, has invited me to join her in Portugal next spring. Katherine nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to hear more about her, about all the parts of your life we've missed or ignored. I'd like that too, I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Later, after Katherine had gone to bed and the twins had finally succumbed to exhaustion, I stood alone on the balcony. The Eiffel Tower sparkled in its hourly light show, a distant constellation against the city darkness. 3 months ago, I had been a woman devastated by rejection, taking a stand. That felt radical and frightening. Now I stood in Paris, reconnecting with my daughter on new terms, planning future travels with a friend who knew me only as I am now, not as I had been for decades. The journey was nearing its circular completion, but I would return home altered, not just by the experiences I'd accumulated, but by the perspectives I'd gained. The woman who had sat alone at Bellissimo's on her 70th birthday could never have imagined this particular resurrection. Yet here I stood, firmly within a life reclaimed, watching Paris glitter before me like possibilities made manifest. My return to Massachusetts coincided with the first hints of autumn, a slight crispness in the air, early maple trees beginning their transformation to crimson and gold. After the final embrace with Katherine and the twins at Charles de Gaulle Airport, where we separated for different flights, I had experienced the strange limbo of international travel, hours suspended above the Atlantic, neither here nor there, with ample time to reflect on the journey now concluding. When my taxi finally turned onto my street after the long drive from Logan Airport, I was struck by how simultaneously familiar and foreign my modest home appeared. The garden had flourished. Under Edward's care, late summer flowers nodding in afternoon sunlight. The house itself stood unchanged, yet my perception of it had shifted fundamentally. What had once felt like a consolation prize after the divorce, smaller and less grand than the family home Charles and I had shared, now represented something different. Not a reduction of circumstances, but a deliberate choice, a space entirely my own. Inside, everything remained exactly as I'd left it 3 months earlier, yet filled with the curious emptiness places develop in long human absence. I moved through rooms, opening windows to dispel the stillness, reacquainting myself with possessions that seemed slightly altered by my changed perspective. The comfortable reading chair where I'd spent countless evenings, the kitchen where I'd prepared solitary meals, the study lined with beloved books, all familiar, all mine, all now existing within a context expanded by Mediterranean light and ancient civilizations. Margaret had stocked the refrigerator with essentials and left a vase of fresh flowers on the dining table alongside a note. Welcome. Home, world traveler. Take the day to settle in. Everyone's eager to see you tomorrow, but tonight is yours alone. That first evening unfolded in quiet reorientation. I unpacked deliberately, creating small displays of meaningful souvenirs, an olive wood bowl from a Cretan market, a watercolor of Venetian canals purchased from a sidewalk artist, a silk scarf from a Parisian boutique. Each object carried stories, and memories now woven into the fabric of my identity. As I placed the leather travel journal on my desk, already filled with observations and reflections from Athens to Paris, I felt a sense of completion, unlike anything I'd experienced before. Not the exhausted relief of a task finished, but the satisfied recognition of a circle properly closed. The following morning, I arrived at the flagship bookstore earlier than the agreed time, wanting private moments to reacquaint myself with the business that had anchored my life for so many decades. The familiar scent of books and coffee welcomed me as I unlocked the door, moving through quiet aisles illuminated by early sunlight filtering through tall windows. I traced fingers along shelves, noting new titles acquired during my absence, recognizing Margaret's thoughtful curation and featured displays. In my office upstairs, everything remained meticulously organized. The monthly reports she'd sent electronically were printed and filed in labeled folders. The desk calendar showed upcoming events, meetings, and author signings neatly penciled through the fall months. The business had not merely survived without my physical presence. It had thrived under Margaret's capable leadership. I was reviewing finances when a gentle knock preceded her appearance in the doorway, face alight with genuine pleasure. "Welcome back," she said, crossing the room to embrace me warmly. "You look marvelous, rested and somehow expanded." "Travel will do that," I replied, returning her hug. "Thank you for everything. The reports, the updates, keeping this place running seamlessly." "It runs itself these days," she said with characteristic modesty. "You built something that functions beautifully by design. Though everyone's missed you terribly," she added. "Not just the staff. Customers have been asking daily when our traveling bookseller would return." By mid-morning, the store had filled with employees from all 7 locations, gathered for what had been described as a business meeting but instantly transformed into a homecoming celebration. They greeted me with enthusiastic hugs, questions about favorite moments from the journey, and, to my surprise, a large poster board covered with printed emails. "Your greatest hits," Eliza explained with a grin. "Favorite passages from your dispatches. We've been saving them." I moved closer, recognizing my own words arranged in a colorful collage. Observations about Santorini sunsets, reflections on Renaissance masterpieces, musings about identity and reinvention in later life. Surrounding these excerpts were handwritten, notes from staff members, their responses, reflections, and appreciation for what they had taken to calling the Sullivan Odyssey. "There's more," Margaret announced, unveiling a display table near the store's entrance, covered with books mentioned in my emails, titles about Greek history, Italian art, French literature, alongside travel memoirs and philosophical works on personal transformation. A handwritten sign proclaimed, "Recommended by our traveling bookseller. Join Harriet's journey through literature." "Sales have been extraordinary," Eliza whispered, as customers began exploring the display. "People who've never set foot outside. New England are reading Durrell's Mediterranean writings and Mary McCarthy on Florence. You've created accidental book clubs all over the region." The observation left me momentarily speechless. My personal journey, shared initially as simple updates to my staff, had rippled outward in ways I never anticipated, inspiring others to explore, if not physically then through literature, beyond familiar boundaries. The afternoon brought another surprise. All 3 of my children arrived together without prior arrangement, each bearing different offerings. Aaron brought architectural drawings for the Cambridge store renovation, proudly pointing out features preserved from the original structure while enhancing functionality for modern needs. Rebecca presented summary documents from her work with the Foundation's legal team, highlighting programs for literacy outreach in underserved communities. Katherine carried a thick portfolio containing student essays analyzing classical literature mentioned in my travel dispatches. Her university class had apparently been following my journey through their own academic lens. We gathered in the bookstore cafe, an impromptu family council filled with overlapping conversations and tentative new connections. The tension that had characterized our last meeting at this very location had dissipated, replaced by something not yet comfortable but no longer adversarial. My children spoke of their own transformations during my absence, professional recalibrations, financial adjustments, shifts in priorities that echoed in their own ways my journey toward authenticity. "Madison's joining the store's Young Readers Book Club," Rebecca mentioned, referring to her daughter who had once shown little interest in literature. "She says if Grandma can explore new worlds, so can she. The foundation structure is actually brilliant," Aaron admitted with characteristic reluctance to offer direct praise. "Forces us to engage with the business as more than just an inheritance, as something meaningful in itself." Katherine, ever the academic, had brought course proposals for community education programs to be hosted in our stores, literature classes accessible to people without formal higher education. "The Foundation's mission," she explained, interpreted through my particular skills. I listened to their ideas, offering suggestions and asking questions, conscious that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. They were coming to me as collaborators rather than dependents, contributors rather than entitled heirs. The change remained fragile, subject to old patterns we might easily slip back into without vigilance, but it represented genuine evolution, nonetheless. Late that evening, after the impromptu celebrations had concluded and the last staff member had departed, I sat alone in my office considering the day's revelations. My desk calendar showed appointments already scheduled for the coming weeks: financial reviews, foundation meetings, preliminary discussions about publishing a collection of my travel writings. Life was rapidly reorganizing itself around my return, threatening to fill every available hour if I allowed it. I opened my leather travel journal to its final blank page and wrote, "Home contains me differently now. The business, the foundation, even my relationships with my children, all exist within new parameters I've established rather than boundaries others defined for me. The challenge now is maintaining this hard-won sovereignty while re-engaging with responsibilities I choose to carry. The journey doesn't end with returning to familiar geography. Perhaps it truly begins here, in the integration of who I was with who I've become, in the daily practice of living authentically within ordinary circumstances." This morning I received an email from Diana confirming our plans for Portugal next spring. 6 months from now, I'll board another plane, explore another coast, continue conversations with a friend who knows me only as I am now. Between now and then lies the greater adventure, bringing my reclaimed self home, ensuring she doesn't disappear back into old patterns and expectations. I hung a small framed photograph on my office wall today, not of famous monuments or breathtaking vistas, but of myself standing alone on the Venetian Rialto Bridge at sunrise, smiling directly into the camera with unguarded joy. Diana took it our last morning together, capturing not just the remarkable backdrop, but the woman I'd become against all odds and expectations. Every time old doubts arise or familiar pressures threaten to overwhelm me, I'll look at that woman, her, silver hair catching early light, her posture straight with hard-won confidence, her eyes bright with possibilities still unexplored. She is my compass now, my true north. At 70, I finally recognize her. She is me, as I was always meant to be. I closed the journal and placed it on the corner of my desk where it would remain visible, not an artifact of a completed adventure, but a foundation document for the continuing journey. Outside my office windows, twilight softened the edges of familiar streets. Bookstore lights illuminated displays of worlds waiting to be discovered through pages and imagination. Staff had departed, but evidence of their presence remained in coffee cups not yet cleared, in conversation circles of chairs not yet straightened. Tomorrow would bring its own demands and opportunities. Foundation meetings to establish new literacy programs. Discussions with Margaret about management structures that would allow me continued freedom for future travels. Family dinners being cautiously rescheduled, with new boundaries respected on all sides. But tonight belonged to quiet integration, the private recognition that journeys never truly end. They simply transform into new beginnings, if we have the courage to keep walking forward, eyes open to possibilities we once couldn't imagine for ourselves. I switched off my office light and descended the bookstore stairs, moving through darkened aisles where thousands of stories waited silently on shelves. Tomorrow, customers would enter seeking adventures contained within these pages. I would be here to guide them, enriched by my own explorations, ready to suggest pathways through literature that might expand their worlds as travel had expanded mine. Outside, stars appeared in the deepening Massachusetts sky. The same stars that had shone above Greek islands and Roman forums, Venetian canals and Parisian boulevards. Their constancy across different geographies felt reassuring, a reminder that certain truths remain unchanged despite our personal transformations. I had left this place months earlier, seeking liberation from limiting patterns and relationships. I returned not simply free, but fundamentally altered, stronger in my certainties, clearer in my boundaries, richer in experience and connection. The woman betrayed on her 70th birthday would never have predicted this particular ending to her story. But then, as my travels had taught me repeatedly, endings often concealed within them the most promising beginnings. And I was, at 70, only just beginning. Winter descended upon New England with characteristic determination, transforming my garden into a minimalist sculpture of snow-laden branches and crystalline formations. 6 months had passed since my return from Europe, and life had settled into new rhythms that honored both my responsibilities and my hard-won independence. The Sullivan Literary Legacy Foundation had officially launched in October with a gala, event that brought together community leaders, literacy advocates, educators, and, most surprisingly, my entire family spanning 3 generations. Aaron, Rebecca, and Katherine had each found their places within the foundation structure, contributing their particular strengths to our shared mission in ways that seemed to genuinely engage them. "I never would have predicted this," Margaret commented one evening as we reviewed the Foundation's first quarterly report in my office. The numbers were promising: grants awarded to struggling rural libraries, scholarship funds established for aspiring writers from low-income backgrounds, a mobile literacy program serving elder care facilities. Your children actually working together without conflict. Neither would I admitted, studying photographs from recent Foundation events. Rebecca instructing volunteer lawyers in providing pro bono services to help independent bookstores navigate complex lease negotiations. Aaron overseeing renovations of a historic building that would become a community literary center. Katherine leading intergenerational writing workshops where my grandchildren participated alongside residents from local senior centers. "It's almost as if they needed meaningful involvement beyond just financial inheritance," Margaret observed. "Purpose is powerful," I agreed. "They're building something now, not just waiting to receive something." The business itself had evolved as well. Shortly after my return, Margaret and I had restructured management across all 7 stores, distributing responsibilities more evenly and creating greater autonomy for location managers. This deliberate decentralization had freed me from daily operational decisions while maintaining my role in strategic direction and special projects. One such project sat before me now, a thick manuscript titled "The Late Blooming Adventurer: Reflections from a Traveling Bookseller." My collected travel dispatches, expanded and organized into thematic sections, had attracted interest from a respected publishing house specializing in literary memoirs. The editor's encouraging notes filled the margins, alongside suggestions for additional material on the before and after of my journey. "Will you include the birthday dinner?" Margaret asked, noticing the manuscript. "The absence of dinner, you mean?" I corrected with a wry smile. "Yes, though not to assign blame. It's simply where the story begins." "A catalyzing moment," she nodded. Though I suspect transformation had been brewing long before that particular disappointment. She was right, of course. The empty table at Bellissimo's had merely crystallized a pattern of imbalance decades in the making. The journey that followed, both geographic and emotional, had been simultaneously an escape from and a return to my truest self. My phone chimed with an incoming message from Diana. "Lisbon accommodations confirmed. Ocean View apartment in Alfama District, April through June. Counting days until our Portuguese adventure begins. Missing your insightful observations and excellent taste in wine." I smiled, anticipation warming me despite the snow swirling outside my office window. My spring travel plans remained intact, supported now by systems I'd established to maintain both business and familial connections during my absence. Quarterly Foundation meetings scheduled around my itinerary. Weekly video, updates with Margaret and location managers. Monthly family dinners with my children and grandchildren, transformed from obligation to genuine pleasure through clearer boundaries and more authentic engagement. "You should see this," Margaret said, turning her tablet to show me Sullivan Literary's social media page. A newly posted photo showed Madison, Rebecca's 12-year-old daughter, presenting her school book report on Greek mythology. She stood proudly beside a display board featuring photographs I'd taken of the Acropolis, her presentation titled, "In My Grandmother's Footsteps: How Ancient Stories Shape Modern Lives." These unexpected ripples continued to surprise and move me, how my personal journey had influenced others in ways I never anticipated. Young readers asking for books about places I'd visited, staff members planning their own travels, however modest. Grandchildren suddenly curious about world geography and foreign languages. "The European travel section sells out weekly," Margaret reported. "And those philosophy books you mentioned in your dispatches from Athens, we can't keep them in stock." Madarive, scheduled signing event for the memoir, still months away, had already generated a waiting list for attendance. Local book clubs had requested advance reading copies. The regional NPR station had contacted me about a potential interview series exploring late-life reinvention. "You've become something of a reluctant role model," Margaret observed, "particularly for women of a certain age." The thought both amused and sobered me. I had never sought to inspire others, had never imagined my personal reclamation might resonate beyond my immediate circle. Yet the evidence suggested otherwise. Emails arriving daily from women sharing their own stories of deferred dreams now being reconsidered, of boundaries being established after decades of accommodation, of possibilities being reclaimed in later life. "Speaking of women of a certain age," Margaret continued, glancing at her watch, "aren't you meeting Judith and Eleanor for dinner? It's nearly 6. Indeed, my oldest friends awaited me at a new restaurant downtown, part of our monthly ritual, re-established upon my return. Our friendship had deepened through my absence, their enthusiastic responses to my travel dispatches revealing dimensions of their personalities I'd overlooked in our decades of acquaintance. Now our conversations ranged far beyond local gossip and grandchildren's achievements, exploring ideas and possibilities with newfound energy. As I gathered my coat and briefcase, a text message arrived from Erin. Foundation Board approved the summer reading program for Title I schools. Budget actually came in under projections. Thought you'd want to know. This simple professional update from my once dismissive son represented its own kind of journey, his gradual recognition of the business acumen I demonstrated for decades, while he followed his father's more flashy but less substantial example. Now, at 42, Erin was finally developing the patient attention to detail that sustainable success required. The foundation work had revealed strengths in him I'd always suspected existed beneath his bravado. Outside, snow had transformed Millfield's downtown into a picturesque winter scene, street lamps glowing through gentle flurries, shop windows warmly illuminated against early darkness. I paused before the original Sullivan Literary storefront, now our flagship location, watching customers browse among shelves I'd stocked by hand in those early struggling years. A young woman emerged from the store, a canvas bag filled with books, slung over her shoulder, her expression thoughtful as she consulted a small notebook. Something in her determined stance reminded me of myself at 25, passionate about literature, uncertain about direction, hungry for experiences beyond my limited horizons. "Excuse me," she said, suddenly noticing me. "Are you Harriet Sullivan, the traveling bookseller?" I acknowledged that I was, surprised at being recognized. "I've read all your travel dispatches online," she explained. "The bookstore has them printed, in a binder for customers to read while they have coffee. They're wonderful, especially your reflections on starting again at 70. She hesitated, then added, "I'm 31, and feeling stuck in a corporate job I hate. Your writing made me think it's not too late to change direction." "It's never too late," I assured her, "though you needn't wait as long as I did." She smiled, clutching her book bag closer. "I've signed up for a travel writing course at the community college, and I'm saving for a solo trip to Greece next year. Athens first," I advised. Give yourself time to adjust before island hopping. That's exactly what you recommended in your third dispatch, she laughed. I've practically memorized them. After she continued on her way, I resumed my walk toward the restaurant, contemplating this unexpected encounter. The snowflakes caught in my silver hair, temporary diamonds dissolving with my body's warmth. At 71, I had finally understood what had eluded me for decades, that living authentically was not a selfish act, but a generous one, creating permission for others to do the same. The restaurant appeared ahead, golden light spilling onto snow-covered sidewalks. Through the window, I could see Judith and Eleanor already seated at our usual table, animated in conversation as they awaited my arrival. Beyond this evening stretched days filled with meaningful work, relationships reconfigured on healthier terms, and future journeys already taking shape on the horizon. The betrayal that had once seemed devastating had become, in retrospect, a gift. The catalyst needed to break patterns too comfortable to abandon without provocation. The empty chairs at Bellissimo's had initiated a journey far more significant than any I might have taken had my children appeared that evening as promised. I had titled the final chapter of my forthcoming memoir, The Circular Journey, reflecting how departure and return created a complete circle of transformation. Yet standing now in gently falling snow, watching life continue around me, strangers hurrying home, lovers walking hand in hand, my friends waiting with stories to share, I recognized that circles could spiral upward, that each return occurred at a higher elevation than the departure. My journey hadn't ended with my homecoming 6 months ago. It continued with each choice to maintain my reclaimed authenticity, each decision to balance connection with independence, each moment of seeing myself clearly without diminishment or apology. As I reached for the restaurant door, my phone chimed, with a message from Katherine. Just heard from Paris. That small bookshop near our apartment wants to host a French translation of your memoir when it's published. The twins insist we must return for the signing event. Planning spring break around it if that works with your schedule? I smiled, imagining this unexpected future. My words translated into French, a return to Paris with family who now saw me. More clearly, new adventures branching from the original journey like tributaries from a river, finding multiple paths to the same sea. Perfect timing, I typed in response. I'll be finishing my Portuguese travels then. We can meet in Paris before I return home. Inside the warm restaurant, my friends greeted me with genuine affection. Our conversation immediately picked up. Threads from previous discussions, Eleanor's tentative plans to join a painting retreat in Santa Fe, Judith's recent decision to downsize and travel more extensively herself. It's contagious, she explained with mock accusation. This late-blooming adventuring of yours. We're all catching the fever. At our age, Eleanor added, raising her wine glass in a toast. That's the only fever worth catching. I joined their laughter, grateful for friendship that had evolved alongside my own transformation. The evening unfolded in that perfect balance of meaningful conversation and comfortable silences that only decades of connection can produce. Later, walking home beneath clearing skies where stars now punctuated the darkness between scattered clouds, I considered the strange circular journey that had brought me here, not just from Europe and back, but from a woman defined by others' needs, to one who had finally claimed her own name and story. The path ahead sparkled with fresh snow unmarked by footprints, an invitation to continue forward, creating new patterns with each deliberate step. At 71, with decades of wisdom earned through both joy and sorrow, I moved confidently into that unwritten future, grateful for the birthday betrayal that had finally set me free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right, on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.